records. And so we want to replicate that. So thank you.
And will we be starting out with Nelson's presentation already loaded, or?
I think we should start out with just our faces and then jump in once.
So Ryan, anytime you want me to stop sharing, I'll be happy to stop sharing. And we are at 53 participants right now.
Great.
Nelson, are you going to kick things off for the official start then?
I'd be happy to, Ryan. Yep.
Right.
So you are good to go, Nelson.
Anytime you are. Yep.
Yeah, we are. We are good to go then.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I would like to welcome everybody to today's workshop that is hosted by the BC Institute of Agrologists and is part of the 2024 BC Land Summit. My name is Nelson Jetel, and it's a pleasure to be here with a number of my colleagues to talk a little bit about some of the agrology and the water issues that are facing us. I'd like to start off by doing our typical and traditional land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are here in the traditional territories of the Okanagan Silks people. I'm calling from Kelowna today, and it's a pleasure to be able to play, work, and study here on these traditional unceded territories. With that, I would like to introduce our hosts and facilitators, Ryan O'Grady and Jane Kerner, both from the BC Institute of Agrology.
Thank you, Nelson. Ryan O'Grady here. I'm grateful to be joining from Cowichan territory here today. Beautiful Cowichan tribes. Yeah, really appreciate you joining today. I'm the registrar with the BC Institute of Agrologists. I've been with BCIA for about 3 months now. I'll be your moderator for the day. But before we kind of get into some more details, I'll invite Jane Kerner to introduce herself, the interim CEO of BCIA.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, Jane Kerner here. I've been interim CEO since last July. I am been a consultant agrologist for the last 40 years. And so I'm working part-time here on the island, part-time up at the ranch in Cache Creek. And I am speaking from the territory of the Lekwungen people today. And it's really a beautiful day here. So we're happy to welcome you all.
Thank you, Jane. A few kind of administrative tasks. We do have everybody set up as attendees, and so if you would like to ask a question, we invite you to use the Q&A functionality at the bottom. So if you take your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box that will allow the questions to come into the panel, and so we'll be able to address those kind of as they come in. There is the chat function, which is also still functional, but we will be focusing more on the Q&A. One of the with this being part of the Land Summit, we will be recording a session. And so the recording is currently underway. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. But maybe then we'll get into a little bit of background context. So the Land Summit is a conference which happens every 5 years. So we're very fortunate that this is happening May 8th to 10th of this year in Nanaimo. So early registration is open. And we definitely hope that many of you are able to attend that with your colleagues. There'll be quite a few different groups represented there. The BC Institute of Agrologists is one of the core groups who is part of that, along with the landscape architects, the real estate folks, the appraisers, and the planners. And every year there's a different group of affiliated partners as well. So you'll see quite a few different groups represented at the conference. We're hoping to have over 700 delegates, so we're really looking forward to that happening in May. So this specific webinar is part of the lead up to that, where each of the core groups as part of the Land Summit organization organizes a webinar. And so very grateful to have a fantastic panel for you here today, and very near and dear to my heart, along with Jane and Nelson, long-term professional agrologists. I'm also fortunate to be a dual registrant with an engineering degree. And so I've been a long-time dual registrant. And as lots of rules and regulations evolve, We really see the value of cross-pollination and collaboration between professional groups and professional designations as just really being really foundational and important to all of our work. And so fortunate on the panel here today to have an RP Bio, a PAG, and an engineer representing three very distinct groups. And hopefully you'll find it really interesting as far as the connections between the three. So as far as the layout for today, each of the panelists will be providing kind of a short presentation, 15 minutes-ish, emphasis on ish. And then we wanted to make sure that we provided plenty of time at the end for open conversation. So with that, if there are any questions, please pop them in the Q&A. I'll definitely be monitoring that as we go. We'll be giving it over to each of the panelists to go through their speeches, and we'll ask questions during the session during each of the presentations to be held into the end. But then we'll definitely have time probably for one or two questions after each presentation. And then at the end, we'll have at least half an hour for kind of a group panel conversation. So with that, I'll maybe pause for a moment. I don't see any other questions coming into the Q&A. So with that, I will maybe pass the mic back over to Nelson and invite him to introduce himself, his organization, and a bit of his role. So over to you, Nelson.
Thanks so much, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. My name is Dr. Nelson Jetel. I'm the Water Stewardship Director at the Okanagan Basin Water Board. I've been here for the last 17 years in this role and thoroughly enjoying engaging with a number of partners and actors within the Okanagan to be able to deliver on some of the water management services that the Okanagan Basin Water Board provides. I am going to kickstart into my presentation here if I can. Right. If I can just get a thumbs up that people can see the
Looks great.
presentation. Great, thank you. And I go find my slides. Great. So welcome again, everybody. I'm going to have an opportunity over the next 50 minutes or so to take you through a little bit of a journey through the Okanagan watershed, a little bit about water governance and some of the active files that we're working on here in the Okanagan. To start off, I'd like to situate you. This is an aerial photo of the Okanagan Basin, nestled within British Columbia's interior plateau. This vital watershed unites with the United States in the southern boundary in Osoyoos. We lie approximately 390 kilometers southeast of Vancouver and 600 kilometers west of Calgary. And this, you can see the distinct features of a glacier carved valley here with sort of the typical rounded hillsides. And in the middle there, we have Okanagan Lake that is one of the jewels of the region. So for my presentation, I'll be talking a little bit about sort of three issues that I thought would be interesting and intersect here. I'll highlight several innovative and trending topics, and given the largest developments and challenges in agrology and watershed management, with the few minutes that we have together, I'm hoping to cover the following issues. So I'll talk a little bit about the overview of the unique structure of the Okanagan Basin Water Board. What is it that we do? Talk a little bit about climate change adaptation in times of change and discuss how the impacts of climate change on watersheds are very much in front of us today, and we're seeing some of the effects and impacts, and talk a little bit about addressing the profound impacts of things such as the record heat that we experienced in 2022 and then again in 2023. Global water cycle contributions to severe storms. Just recently, we've had some significant, what used to be called pineapple expresses, and now we're called atmospheric rivers, hit British Columbia and impact the Okanagan. And we have multi-year droughts and other issues, including fires that we deal with on a year-to-year level. And this underscores the urgency of integrating watershed governance with agrology to manage these increasing risks effectively. Agrology helps farmers adapt to and beat climate change with real-time analysis and predictive insights. And this can include things from monitoring threats such as drought, pest disease, smoke taint, and extreme temperatures. emphasizing the importance of monitoring soil health and quantifying soil carbon to assist in regenerative agricultural practices are central to a number of my colleague agrologists. And I'll be focusing on this presentation on some of the changing trends in the hydrograph as we see it here in the Okanagan. I'll also be talking about collaboration as a foundation to governance in the 21st century. Today we have a panel of 3 presenters here that bring diverse and incredibly important backgrounds, of which are all necessary for us to be able to solve some of the complex and challenging issues that we face with both our clients and with governments throughout the Okanagan and British Columbia. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview of the Okanagan Basin Water Board. So the Okanagan Basin Water Board was initiated in 1972 formally through something called Supplementary Letters Patent. It was initiated as a result of this grassroots challenge with eutrophication, or the Okanagan main stem lakes ultimately becoming soupy green because of unconsolidated septic fields largely, but also from agricultural runoff. And as a result of that, there was this grassroots push to be able to create a new governance structure that ultimately brought together the 3 regional districts. And we created this service delivery format, which the Okanagan Basin Water Board does well. And the OBWE does 3 key things. We provide for water milfoil control, which is a pest, an aquatic organism, an aquatic weed that was introduced in the Okanagan in the late 70s, early 80s. And we have a program every year that ultimately provides for some of that to be managed on public beaches. As a result of this eutrophication that was taking place in the Okanagan, we created this innovative grant program whereby every taxpayer in the Okanagan contributed to a pot of funding, and local governments were provided with an 18% offset to improving their wastewater treatment. This has brought water that initially was incredibly eutrophic or nutrient rich in the 70s to some of the best water quality in the world. And it's that kind of collaborative program that provided for a competitive edge for many of the local governments throughout the Okanagan. And then where I'll be spending most of my time is this 3rd service area, which is water management. And we deal with everything from endocrine disruptor studies in the Okanagan region to issues around supply and demand management. And more recently, putting a lot of focus and emphasis on drought and managing both fish and agriculture and other needs during times of low flow conditions. So the sewage facilities grant program that I mentioned had this start in the mid 70s, and it was really intended to be able to address this nutrient problem that we had in the Okanagan. And you can see on the bottom right-hand corner what it looked like in the early days of the Okanagan. This is the north arm near Vernon, and then that same arm today in the top right-hand corner, where we have some of the highest water quality in North America. So I thought I would start and chat a little bit about the guiding principles of the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And these guiding principles ultimately allow us to be able to both support our collaborative efforts with our partners, but also engage with multiple levels of government that really allow us to bring forward some of these innovative projects. So we think regionally and think long-term. We protect nature for the benefit of all. We anticipate change and we plan accordingly. We balance multiple priorities, and we focus on clear communications. And all of this sort of leads me to one of my favorite sayings, which is this concept of action expresses priority. And one of the things as a small office here in the Okanagan, looking at several of these water issues, is the need for us to be able to address them in ways that are proactive. One of the issues that is both trending, but also something we've been experiencing in the Okanagan for quite some time now is climate change and some of the impacts. There is this famous saying that talks about if climate change was a shark, water would be its teeth. And here in the Okanagan, you see that in spades, where for those of you that are familiar with the hydrograph, which I'm showing here, on the x-axis, you have the months, and on the y-axis, we have the flow. And what we're experiencing is traditionally 1971 to 1996, we would have a hydrograph that would have a peak that would be around mid to late June. And so this ultimately is a measure of the amount of water that is coming into the Okanagan. What we see now is that the hydrograph is shifting so that the snow melt is happening earlier in the season. And the other thing that we're seeing is that the steepness of the slopes is increasing. So the amount of snow is ultimately melting faster. This is one of the things that has been exacerbated by other biological activities on the landscape, including mountain pine beetles. And so you have these geophysical effects, in some cases culminated by massive events like the firestorm of 2003. And in recent years, it has been an abnormality for us not to be having a smoky August here in the region with significant fires that are burning throughout the Okanagan region. So one of the things that we think a lot about here at the Okanagan Basin Water Board is the need for us to be able to implement good governance structure. And they include these 4 criteria sets. So whenever we think about projects that we manage, we talk about flexibility, whether it is equitable, whether it's efficient, and in this case, this is an economic efficiency that we're thinking about, and this idea of whether or not it's enforceable. So whether or not we're talking about good governance around protecting the Okanagan region and British Columbia from invasive species like zebra and quagga mussels, or whether or not we're talking about dealing with milfoil control or various threats to our drinking water supplies, such as chemicals like TFSA, which has been in the news recently, or items like endocrine disruptors. These are the good governance principles that we apply to the board, and they've served us well as we've worked with both industry and university partners to be able to look at several of the key issues that we face here in the Okanagan. This graphic here really speaks to the multidimensional sort of physical, but also human dimensions of managing water in the Okanagan. So in the bottom, you have the typical watershed where you have the hydrograph, you have cycling of water, you have an emphasis on groundwater and surface water interaction, and many of the physical processes that we might think about for water management. In the middle layer, you have a network of people, and each one of those nodes ultimately is an individual person. They belong to organizations, and they make decisions that impact many of the bio and physical effects that occur within the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And then you have the level of an individual person who has an attitude, effects, and preferences. They're motivated by various things. They've got perceptions and benefits. And they have a range of information, sometimes good, sometimes limited. And as a result of that package, the individual makes decisions, and those decisions ultimately play out in a number of different ways. So when we think about water management and water governance in the Okanagan, I like to think about this graphic and the interaction between the physical nature of the watershed and the people that ultimately make decisions upon it. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the Okanagan is this concept of collaboration and the need to ultimately work together. This is attributed to an old African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it speaks to the need of us wanting to be able to think long-term in many of the issues that we deal with in the Okanagan, and a need for us to be able to collaborate. Oftentimes collaboration is thought of people working together, and so this sort of is emblematic of that. But more often than that, this is sort of the environment that we come into, where there is a scenario where there's multiple things that are going on, and not everybody is necessarily playing to really the same ends. And we see these kind of effects in things like upper watershed impacts by tourism, by forestry, and oftentimes it's those impacts that relate to other watershed issues lower down in the valley that could include everything from safe and clean drinking water to ensuring that our waters are fishable and swimmable. So as I wrap up my my presentation here, I wanted to end on one of the key strategies and tactics that we use in the Okanagan to be able to enable and support collaboration. I feel strongly that collaboration really needs to be something that is implemented at every level of an organization. And one of the ways that we do it at the Okanagan Basin Water Board is the monthly meeting of water professionals, agriculturalists, people that rely on the fish, several of the Aboriginal groups, and we get together and we talk about the things that we care about. It provides for a forum for conflict at times, and it also provides for a forum for us to be able to better understand and learn from each other. So collaboration in watershed governance, particularly in the Okanagan, is a critical aspect of ensuring the health and resilience of water resources. The complexity of watersheds, which often span various jurisdictions and encompass diverse ecosystems, necessitates a governance system that allows for input from all those who are not formally statutory decision makers. This inclusive approach ensures that diverse perspectives, such as those from local communities, industries, and various levels of government, are considered in the decision-making process. It also acknowledges the importance of local knowledge and leadership, including that from Indigenous communities who have a strong historical and cultural connection to the water and the land. The Okanagan Basin Water Board's approach highlights the importance of collaborative governance in providing formal ways for input on local resource development and environmental management decisions. And this can range from the siting of gravel pits or the siting of gravel pits to the implementation of water licensing policies. Such collaboration seeks to balance local control with broader provincial and federal oversight, recognizing that certain decisions may be best made at the local level, while others require higher levels of intervention. Furthermore, the development of environmental flow needs for streams in the Okanagan has been achieved through extensive collaboration with stakeholders and experts, underscoring the value of collective expertise in creating robust and realistic recommendations for water management. The collaboration effort in the Okanagan encompasses a detailed understanding of each stream's unique characteristics and environmental flow needs, and has been developed with careful consideration of natural flows and human use. In summary, collaboration is not just a strategy, but a necessity for successfully managing and governing watersheds in the Okanagan, as it integrates local expertise and values, fosters shared responsibility, and enhances the collective capacity to manage water resources, sustainability, and equitability. And I think I am right on 15 minutes. So with that, I will stop here, and looking forward to my colleagues' presentations and the questions to follow.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Maybe before we jump on to the next presentation, we'll have time for a couple of questions here. And thanks to those of you who've been able to join since things started here. We are recording the session, and if you do have any questions, we ask you to drop them into the Q&A, and you can access that by moving your mouse to the bottom of your screen and hitting the Q&A box, and that will come up to the list of panelists here. So with that, Nelson, there was one question regarding the monthly meetings that you spoke to, and wondering if you have forest professionals represented at that table.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's an important one. The short answer is absolutely we do. And we both engage with the forestry sector through some of the mills and some of the operations that happen through the Okanagan, and we often have representation from some of the forestry professionals that work in the industry. At the same time, we also have a strong feedback and strong participation from a number of key people within the region from the Ministry of Forestry and the department. So we both have the government sector component that is looking at some of the forestry issues, but equally as important, many of the professionals, and we definitely have professional foresters that are around that table.
Thank you very much, Nelson. And I think for many of us on the call, that speaks to the importance of the professional designations and the practice areas of each of those specific areas, particularly for those of us under the Professional Governance Act. And there's been lots of changes over the last few years, and definitely evolving conversations between the regulators to ensure that we're supporting each other to raise the societal collective awareness of the importance of having a qualified professional, but also respecting the practice areas of each of our own regulatory areas. There was a hand up with, I believe Corinne has their hand up. I'm just wondering, I'm going to press the allow to talk button here. This whole Zoom interface is always interesting. But Corinne, did you have a question for Nelson here?
Well, the only question I have is that they talked about doing the environmental flow needs. And I guess what I'm wondering, I mean, I understand it takes the collaboration, but how long did it take for them to kind of characterize that water basin? And if the people wanted to take that up on other areas, maybe get a bit of a sense of a realistic timeline.
Hi, Corinne. Thanks for that question. We are hosting an entire conference on pretty much that question in March here in the Okanagan. But the short answer to your question is that it took us about 5 years to be able to go from concept inception. We went through 3 phases of identification of both methods and techniques to be able to apply. And we now have an active partnership with the Okanagan Nation Alliance Fisheries Department. And so of the 61 subbasins in the Okanagan, we have 18 of them fully characterized with both environmental flows and environmental critical flows. And in addition to that, we have increased the hydrometric network in the Okanagan from 24 to just over 50. So 2 critical pieces to better understand and manage environmental flows in the region.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelson. I did drop the link to that conference that you just mentioned in the chat. So if everybody opens up that chat box, you should find the link to that upcoming conference. And maybe just one last question before we jump over to Rod. There was a question, Nelson, on your funding model and what that looks like.
Thanks, Ryan. So the Okanagan Basin Water Board is local government, and our funding comes from property taxes. And so everybody in the Okanagan that owns a property has a line item that goes to the Okanagan Basin Water Board if you are in the Okanagan Basin Water Board proper. So for example, the Okanagan Similkameen local government, those people that are in the Similkameen don't contribute to the operations of the OBWB. Our annual budget's about $3.6 million a year, and we supplement that by significant grants that we bring to the region from other levels of government and other agencies.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nelson. Well, with that, we'll shift on. That's a great segue talking about local government over to Rod. And I'll invite you to introduce yourself and get a bit of context in your role there. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rod McLean. I am the utility planning manager for the city of Kelowna. And as you can tell by the sign on my video there, I'm an engineer. You'll be pleased to know that I'm an agricultural engineer by practice. I'm not a PAG, but I started that about 35 years ago now and worked in that industry for about 15 years and then went into heavy civil engineering projects through private consulting. And it's only been in the last 6 years that I've been with the city of Kelowna as a utility planning manager. And essentially what I do there is I set up the capital programs and operating budgets for the entire utility network, water, wastewater, stormwater, and civil works. And so I'm going to share my screen here. I just want somebody to confirm that they can actually see the screen, which is important.
Yep, good to go. Thank you.
Good to go. I got the right screen. You can see a mouse moving.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. I love talking about agriculture, and I do so in council quite regularly, and I answer many of the questions that they have. And I'm really pleased to talk about this issue here, drought and water supply. We talk about water supply, but we don't always talk about drought. And frankly, here in the Okanagan, we're right in the middle of it. I've presented this in different ways over the last 5 years, but to crunch it down into 12 minutes is making me talk fast. So forgive me if I clumsily go through this. In 2018, the city of Kelowna absorbed the assets of the Southeast Kelowna Irrigation District from the province. Over that time, staff have blended forces. We've entered new policy arenas, and we've kind of become an agricultural water provider in addition to a potable water supplier to the rural community there as well. So the system basically got split into potable and non-potable supply. Today, I'm going to talk only about the non-potable supply, which is the original district setup. And across the city, of course, we have a number of entities. There's been a lot of changes happen in the city over this time, and recognizing that the community now is beginning to recognize that they have to put actions into words and how to make agriculture sustainable in our community. The presentation today, I'm going to try and keep it short, is do a little bit of a system background, show you what we're made of here. Talk about some of the data upgrades that have happened over the 5 or 6 years and why 2023 is so important to us. And we'll show you some of our measurements that we feel confident to put out there now, finally. And I'll talk a little bit about it. So, some of the on-farm consumption talk, some of the water supply audit, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end. I really want to make sure that I'm asking you some questions too, because we certainly don't have all the answers. First of all, I think what I'll do is I'll show you where we are. It's a good thing that Nelson showed you about the lake. Kelowna is sitting in the middle. Calgary is over here. For those, there might be 1 or 2 of you that might be looking at this from outside of British Columbia, but essentially we're located in British Columbia. Vancouver is on the end. And one of the key things here is that while the water in the water in the lake does flow, and essentially what it does in our area is that it will flow upwards and then it will flow down the lake and then eventually down into the Columbia system through the Okanagan River system and all that. What's the photo here basically is our city boundary, and one of the changes that did occur with the city becoming involved in agriculture is that a lot of our heavy works are actually located outside of our city boundaries. So there's a whole variety of policy shifts that were required in the area. So the area that we're talking about is actually Southeast Kelowna, which is this area of farmland in the southern portion of the city, and it's supplied from the upper watershed in the area. And there's about a clientele of about 1,900 hectares, about 600 people in total, maybe more, maybe less, depending on how it's interpreted. And you'll notice, of course, that there's quite an urban fringe that's developed basically along the lake, but also in the interior. And this boundary was established in 1973, similar to what's happening later on in West Kelowna and District of Lake Country, where we're seeing the city slowly infill with properties over time. What's really interesting about Southeast Kelowna is that it's actually supplied by reservoirs way outside the system called the McCullough water system. And this has been developed. Licenses in this go back to the late 1800s and early 1900s, and the water supply is through the hydraulic lake watershed, or other words called McCullough, and there's a series of dams and reservoirs in there, and the water basically is released from the dams, takes about an 8 to 12 hour ride down to our intake, and then supplies a fully pressurized pipe system downstream. So there's very little to no pumping that occurs in the system. Okay, so all the little dots that show up on here are dams that we have in the system. And so McCullough Lake is essentially our main lake that happens here. And then we have a number of diversions that take from the various smaller creeks that make up part of the watershed up in this part of the region. And even this is our main release from the reservoir down to areas south to the hydraulic creek intake. And we have a number of dams which assist us right now with environmental flow needs, which I'll get into a little bit later. Just recently here, we've contracted a consultant to do our asset management plan and master water plan for the non-potable system. And it addresses the future capital works and future O&M needs of the here. And they've produced this picture for us, which is kind of interesting because it demonstrates all of the different diversions in orange. It goes into the various reservoirs that we have in the system, defines where the water is going, and all of our users are actually up here at the end. So this is our main water supply. And when you're getting up into these corners here, the highest spots are our ski hills. Our ski hills, Little White is over here. It's not a ski hill. Little White is over here. Big White, the ski hill, is over in this area. And water eventually makes its way down and through the system from those elevations. Part of the key thing here is that we have no measure for runoff that goes into the system. And so what we do is we rely on past work from 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, where we look at runoff estimates and how the system was developed. And it's a key part of all of this. And then we have a number of water licenses which have been established since the beginning of time, reconciled a couple of times since 1940 and 1997. And we still have about 38,000 megaliters of water accessible in today's water licensing system. We also have non-potable storage license. We have 22,000 megaliters of license there. But really, when it comes all down to it, back in the 40s, and then also 1976, when the system was upgraded, the water licenses were reconciled around this number here, 16,650, which is the maximum, which is what we call a spill level. So McCullough Reservoir can't go any bigger than 16,650 megaliters in size. Yes, there are additional smaller licenses around, but essentially we operate the system around this. So downstream of all that, we have all these system demands, and we have about 1,850 hectares of irrigation. Each one of them, and this is kind of the unique feature of this, each one of them currently have 685 millimeters of allotment each. So that is the depth of water that we apply to any area of land. It's 27 inches of water. Back in 1896, these licenses were established using 30 inches of water on average across the system. And it was only later in the 40s and in the 70s where they removed 3 of the inches to make sure that water losses could be accounted for in the upper watershed. So basically, everybody is promised 685 millimeters at their gate. We have a flow need. We have a critical flow need requirement of 31 liters per second, which we apply here at the intake, and that supplements during drought periods or extreme low events on Mission Creek, which is just to the north. And we partner in this water use plan with the Black Mountain Irrigation District, who operate reservoirs on the other side of the creek. And then we have EFN, we have environmental flow needs to assist with fish passage in here, and that generally exceeds that. There's no way to, we don't ever want to go below 31 liters per second, so we always see more. We've done calculations now on how much consumption we normally know, and it's a net water use because we can't really account for the rainfall and on-farm practices. So we have an idea of what the consumption is in the area. We know that delivery losses are around 1,000 megaliters a year. And then we have a whole bunch of acreages, small, that are not your typical irrigation systems, which run around 60 hectares. Our critical flow measurements are done through this massively modern weir measurement system, but we do measure the water levels and we maintain those flows. There is leakage and other things that happen through the system. We collect and use and estimate our on-farm data using a 2014 land use inventory, which looks at things like, are you farming? Are you not farming? What types of soils you have. This inventory has been updated in 2023, and we plan on using that as part of the new set of estimates and modeling that we have in hand. And again, it goes into crop type and irrigation type and such. And we have plenty of information there. It's not unique, but we meter all of the water in the system, whether it's potable or non-potable. We have an ion water system, which allows, and it has smart water sensors, cell communication, web access, and leak detection. And this is new for the ag community, which is kind of used to basically irrigating as they can. So on the ag side, all users pay an annual rate similar to what they did before based on their total area up to 685 millimeters of water. And when they exceed this, they pay a volumetric charge. And this is pretty consistent with other people in the area. The allotment of 685 changes depending where you are in the city and where you are in the province. And it's a holdover from past practice, but this is what we're doing. But we do measure them, and we allow the farmers to look at their own practices, and it's really good education. They all have access to their own readings and such. We also have a McCullough storage tracking tool where we actually measure daily. We take daily readings. We have them all automated up at the top. In yellow here right now is the latest reading from today, and these are snow water measurements, and we have it for Mission Creek and Grayback Reservoir. And of course, what we do is we try to make we kind of have a historical record of what happened. So the blue line on here, for example, is the snow water that was captured and then released in the system in 2023. I can pick any year, and then this is what happened actually in the reservoir last year, which was it fills, Frechette filled it up, it spilled for about a month, and then it went back, and then it released. And 2023 and 2021 are really interesting years because we had zero rainfall for 4 to 4.5 months in each of those years. Zero rainfall during the growing season. And this is part of the challenges that we face is that now, and so we now have some very good data on exactly how to confirm what our consumption was downstream in the system. And you can kind of see right now that this has ended up here, and this is the starting point in yellow for 2024. And then we're at the point, we're in the third year of testing out this prediction tool where we actually have calculations using the ag use inventory from before and some of the new numerical data that we do have. And we're finding a numerical modeling process which is showing some promise where we can actually, at this point here, guess where our reservoir levels are going to be. In the future, we would like to have our drought prediction back here. Maybe this will happen, maybe this won't, but basically the whole idea is to try and predict as good as we can what can happen to water levels in the system based on different what's occurred in the past, and looking at rainfall data, snow data, antecedent moisture content and other factors in the system. And that's particularly evident that we're really concerned about in 2024. So I'm going to toss a few results at you because I know everybody loves numbers, engineers in particular. We had allotted areas of 1,572 that actually measured for irrigation this year. They consumed about 7,800 megaliters of water. We had some fallow. We still have some issues with trying to confirm fallow and fallow water use and meters. Of course, there is some cheating that happens in the area as well, so we don't always have records of what's going on. And then we have the small records as well. So in total, we have about 1885 acre or hectares in there and consumed about 8,000 megaliters last year. What's more interesting from the water metering is that we actually were able to determine who exceeded the water allotments in 2023, and there was 21% of the people or the farms that were serviced exceeded it last year, and that ended up being 40% of the annual consumption. And then the other users in here this is basically a megaliters divided by your area to produce these numbers. So we have been actively working with these groups here, because we do know that this really amounts to about 10 to 15 services, and every year they exceed. And because of the setup of the system, and they know that they can pay and still get their water, they're allowed to do this. But in a drought year, what happens whenever they reach the 685? Do we cut them off? And this is part of the questions coming up. So I'm going back to my little model that somebody gave me here. And what we've done is we've been able to do a little bit of a water audit for the first time. We know that our end of season storage last year was 9265 megaliters. We know our consumption in the district. We know that the critical flow need can never go less than 327 megaliters out of the system. We have a measured flow going in of 12,000 megaliters. Did it spill? Yes, no. And if it does spill, we know that pretty much McCullough is full. And that whenever it starts when storage starts releasing, we know that everybody downstream is now relying on storage and not runoff. And in this case here, we know that it's spilled for 31 days, believe it or not. So there is quite a bit of excess runoff. We have no idea what's coming out of the hills. The end of year storage was 7,900, so we know that there's a net annual storage use of that, and our actual EFN, our environmental flow need plus losses, was around 1,182 megaliters. And so that means that we had at least 13,400 megaliters of runoff, and we probably had quite a bit more, especially if it went for 31 days. So there's a water audit for the first time ever. Everything in yellow is measured. We have gaps in the system, which we need to model or understand. Okay, I'm over my limit, I'm sorry. Basically, what are the risks in 2024 is low snow, reduced watershed release. If we don't have a spill, it's early consumption off storage and early warning. Critical flows come into play, especially during these things where people are going to be scrutinizing this and they're going to be expecting those flows, so we can't cheat it. And it's an increased risk of low reservoir levels. And now we're starting to look at, well, how do we regulate our demand downstream? And so we have all these our own set of stages of, these are not provincial drought levels stage water releases, but these are our own things. And we're still trying to work through that. And that's part of the questions that I have for you. Assuming everything is right up here and we have a shortage of drought in 2024 and we can meet the environmental flow need requirement, how would you, as agrologists, restrict consumption to agriculture? How do you do that? We have bylaws which do this, but how do you actually do that to people? And how do we do it? Do we apply it fairly, or do we just suck it down to the point where there's no water left in the reservoir and say that's it? And then what would a community expect in this? So basically, in conclusion, there's a lot of work to be done. We have enough measurement going on here now where I think we can get some representative irrigation practices fine-tuned in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. And we're kind of hoping that the ag community latches onto that, and that farmers realize they have more tools and more measurements at their availability. Thank you. I'm just going to finish this off that the city of Kelowna does have a water security planning process in place, or a water responsibility planning process. And one of the principles which has been approved by council is that all residents and water users in the city must have safe, affordable, resilient, and sustainable water supply of high quality drinking water and a reliable supply for agriculture. They did not used to have this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rod. As a fellow engineer, definitely appreciate the data. One question that came in relates to the flow level needs and predictions on the land based on climate change, and wondering if you've been working with forest hydrologists for evaluating some of those flows.
So we participate with the on the Watershed Security Committee with Okanagan Basin Water Board, and we have been involved, and we have also helped fund a number of different projects in hydrology in the area. So the answer to this is yes, and we're beginning to incorporate some of these modeling techniques into some of the tools that we're beginning to develop. It starts though with getting the right data and the right context of the data in place.
Thank you very much. And another question relates to, it was interesting you identify the ability to identify the users who go over that threshold, and wondering if you've identified any patterns or kind of similarities of those are the same crops or the same soil type, or any other kind of patterns that have emerged for those going over that 685 threshold.
Yeah, so as a city, we don't track crops or anything that goes on the property, but those land use inventories from the province will prove interesting, because what we'll do is we'll update we'll get our consultants to update the consumption prediction tools that we do have. And I think basically, because of the tools that we have on the web right now for the farmers can look at this themselves. There's nothing stopping a service person from looking at hourly 15-minute use, daily use on the web on their own system. What we've been doing just in the first couple of years is just using leak detection, because leak detection because these are old systems, they're 40, 50-year-old services in a lot of cases. A lot of them have leaks that have just gone unmeasured for years. And now it took I think we had about 25% of the systems had known leaks and very visible, noticeable leaks in the water meter. These got fixed very quickly over the 2-year period.
Thank you. Last question here, and then we'll move over to Marianne. Wondering if you, and I'm sure you have, but wondering if you've had any key lessons learned from other jurisdictions limiting municipal water use related to agriculture, and kind of parallel to that, wondering if there's been any kind of internal preference or prioritization for different types of agricultural uses within the agricultural sector.
Yeah, the trouble with the city is that everything urban talks urban, and it applies in an urban setting. I know this doesn't apply. I say that very clearly, because to just simply shut off water to agriculture at a moment, unless there's a break in the system, I get it. But the whole idea is to warn people in it well in advance, so that they can make a proper business decision. Agriculture is about business. It's purely an industry on its own, and each property is its own business and must make their own decisions. But they need to have an idea of whether there is going to be a water shortage in that year, and whether we do have the 685 millimeters to give them. That's the real concern in 2024 with the weather patterns outside. Not a lot of you can see this, but a lot of the snow at my house, which is way up. Normally I have lots of snow on my property. It's gone already now. And with our already low water supply, the snow levels are not there yet. We're not willing to make a call at this point. we'd like to wait right up until May, because in 2017 we got, sorry, the term caught with our pants down. It was a very low year, very similar to what happened here, but then it continued snowing. This is that deferred climate change incident that occurred where it snowed and rained every day from March 11th to June 11th here. And if you know your history, Okanagan Lake flooded, Kelowna flooded big time in 2017 with a below average snowmelt. So there's a lot of things that can lead to a drought and a water shortage. And so we're learning those lessons.
Thank you, Rod. Okay, over to Marianne. You could introduce yourself and we'll go through your presentations. We'll maybe have a couple of questions specific to your presentation, and then we'll get into a bit of a group conversation. We will do our best to make sure everybody is able to carry on with their day as of 1:30. So depending on the length of Marianne's presentation here, we'll make sure we have a few minutes at the end for a group chat, but definitely looking forward to your presentation here, Marianne. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so I am a consulting biologist, also located here in Kelowna, BC, in the unceded territory of the Silk Okanagan people, who have cared for this land, water, and all living things in this region for thousands of years. I am with the Ecoscape Environmental Consultants, and I've been working as a biologist here since 2006. And for today's presentation, I'm going to be shifting gears. And when I was reviewing the website of the upcoming BC Land Summit, I was struck by the focus of collaborative planning with different disciplines to tackle land use decisions. And so today in this presentation, I'm going to be presenting two projects that focus on collaboration to improve environmental protection here in the Okanagan Valley. So as Nelson has already highlighted, not only climate change, but also biodiversity loss are the two great environmental challenges of our time. And unfortunately, we are not immune to these challenges here in the Central Okanagan. There was an article in our local news just yesterday stating that according to Stats BC, the Thompson Okanagan population is expected to explode with an additional 250,000 people over the next 20 years. And most of that growth is expected to be here in the Central Okanagan. So with development comes loss of sensitive ecosystems. And to better understand how these ecosystems are being affected, in 2023, Ecoscape was contracted by the Regional District of Central Okanagan to update the sensitive ecosystem inventory. So the original inventory was undertaken in the early 2000s, and it really provided the baseline mapping that's used to create our environmental development permit areas. And for anyone not familiar with EDPs, they are essentially a flagging tool that the municipalities can use to trigger the need for an environmental assessment prior to land being developed. And so the province defines sensitive ecosystem as that of one that's at risk or ecologically fragile. And having an up-to-date sensitive ecosystem inventory is really important because it can help to inform policy guidance, including things like setting retention targets. It is useful to determine cumulative effects of proposed developments. And with this, it also really enables informed decision making. So this is a very quick overview for those of you who may not be familiar with this type of inventory and mapping. Essentially, terrain polygons are mapped using air photo interpretation, and then ecosystem attributes are assigned to those polygons. There's a field component to validate the ecosystem assignment, and then there's really specific data standards that are required that ensure consistency across different mapping projects. So the goal was to update the polygons across the entire central Okanagan region to reflect the on the ground conditions. And so the picture on the left shows an air photo from the early 2000s overlaid with the terrain polygons. And the photo on the right shows how the landscape has changed. In this case, the polygons would be redrawn and reclassified to accurately reflect the new urban development. So once the polygons were complete, we compared the original inventory with the updated to understand how the sensitive ecosystems have changed over the last 20 years. And a couple of quick highlights. So the aquatic ecosystems have largely been protected. Let's see if I can find a Yeah, so if we see the riparian here, we've had very minimal losses. The losses in ecosystems are indicated with the red text, and we've actually had some gains in wetlands. Unfortunately, those gains are due to better mapping nowadays, and not necessarily due to recently created wetlands. But in contrast, the terrestrial ecosystems, especially grasslands, have had a much larger loss of habitat, with most of them converted to residential and agriculture. And also woodlands too. We see a 5% change for woodlands. So with these new data in hand, it raises the question, how well is the environmental development permit process working to protect these different types of sensitive ecosystems? So to begin to address this question, the Okanagan Collaborative Conservation Program contracted Ecoscape to undertake a review of the environmental development permit processes at the various municipalities across the Okanagan Valley. So when the impetus for conducting the review was that many of the environmental development permit areas, they've been in place for more than 20 years. The specifics of the permit process is different in every single jurisdiction. As we see, there continues to be some losses of sensitive ecosystems despite the environmental development permits. And finally, OCCP was hopeful that there may be an opportunity to improve the system through this exercise and potentially to enhance the environmental protection here in the Valley. So, one of the very first steps of this process review was to conduct interviews of planners and QEPs. And the goal was to understand what is working, what could be improved, and how to better share information and coordinate approaches across the region. So I invited 16 planners that work in the jurisdictions from Armstrong in the North Okanagan all the way down to Osoyoos at the border of the US, as well as 6 QEPs to participate, or qualified environmental professionals. So it would be mostly our biologists, but also agrologists, to participate in a 1-hour online interview. And in the end, 10 planners and 4 QEPs were interviewed. And so the outcomes of these interviews were 13 solutions that were categorized as technical, administrative, and policy type solutions. And I want to quickly just provide one example from each of the different types of solutions so that you can get a feel for their complexity. So, an example of a technical solution is to develop a cost effective methodology to assess cumulative impacts of individual developments at both the local and the regional scale. So, here in the central Okanagan, this methodology could leverage that updated sensitive ecosystem inventory data. And it may also be possible combined with an online planning tool that is currently being developed and that could account for ecosystem changing over time. So, an example of an administrative solution was to develop or refine a terms of reference for professional reports that could be utilized across the entire region. And so that would include standardized technical components such as methodology for stratifying environmentally sensitive areas. This is an important recommendation because currently, as I mentioned, every jurisdiction uses their own system. And so there's a lot of confusion when you move between different jurisdictions. And then finally, an example of a policy solution is to establish retention targets for sensitive ecosystem types on a jurisdictional basis. So that considers the ecosystems that remain, those that are still present, but it also takes into account the development objectives within a jurisdiction. So the most exciting part about this project was a one-day workshop held last November where we brought 50 planners and qualified environmental professionals together. And these solutions, these 13 solutions, were presented at this meeting, and the attendees were then asked to prioritize the solutions based on what they felt was most pressing. The attendees were then broken into small mixed working groups, and they workshopped the highest priority solutions, and asking questions or trying to address questions such as who are the key players, what's the preferred approach, and what are the greatest hurdles to enacting those solutions. So it was an inspiring day, and I think that a lot of the participants walked away feeling hopeful and motivated about the possibility of having an improved environmental protection coming forward. We now are in the process of reviewing the outcomes from that meeting and planning the next steps to how to implement some of these solutions. So the second example of a project that truly benefited from a collaborative approach is the development of development of a wildlife corridor action plan. And this project was co-led by the Okanagan Collaborative Conservation Program and the Okanagan Nation Alliance. And my role was, as a consulting biologist, was to facilitate engagement sessions with practicing professionals to both inform and develop the action plan. So the wildlife corridor is about 65 kilometers in length. It extends from Okanagan Mountain Park in the south all the way up to Kalamaka Lake at the north end. It's approximately 1 kilometer wide and encompasses a mosaic of land uses, including public, First Nations, private, and park. And the private land is mostly zoned for agriculture and rural residential. And it's this complexity of land uses that was the driving force for developing the action plan. So the objectives of the corridor are to maintain connectivity between the two parks for the survival of the region's biodiversity, to protect the functioning ecosystems and their ecosystem services, and to protect Indigenous cultural areas for hunting and food gathering. So this is a photo of Okanagan Mountain Provincial Park at the south end of the corridor. This is Mission Creek, which others spoke about previously. It's one of our largest tributaries here in the Okanagan. This is an example of the mosaic of grasslands that this corridor extends through. And I have to throw this picture in too to highlight that the corridor is being encroached upon by both residential and agricultural expansions, both of which that are moving up higher and into our higher elevations. And then finally, this is Kalamaka Lake Provincial Park at the very north end. So to develop the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, we focused on collaboration across a number of different sectors. We established 6 committees that were comprised of experts and working professionals within each focus area. And they included representatives from organizations such as the Environmental Farm Plan, Ministry of Agriculture, land trusts. We had local conservation groups, regional planners, stewardship organizations, academics, and we even had people outside of Canada that have experience developing similar plans elsewhere. We hosted 10 workshops with the different committees, and the Okanagan Collaborative Conservation Program also held one-on-one interviews with silk hunters and community members. And in the end, the engagement process incorporated feedback and ideas from 52 different individuals that represented 30 organizations. So the action plan was just finalized in 2023, and it consists of 15 different actions. But one of the biggest benefits of this collaboration is the incredible workforce that is already knowledgeable and already working on implementing these actions. So I just want to provide an example action that's pertaining to agriculture. Basically, it states that to work with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Agricultural Land Commission, and the Farm Advantage Program to explore opportunities to strengthen environmental protection on agricultural lands. I'd also like to mention that the full action plan is available for download from the Okanagan Collaborative Conservation Program website, and there's also a great promotional video there of the corridor. So overall, these two projects are real-world examples of how a collaborative approach has the potential to improve environmental protection. From bringing planners and QEPs into the same room to figure out how to best implement complex solutions, to engaging diverse perspectives and expertise across disciplines to develop and implement an action plan to protect a vital corridor here in the Okanagan Valley. So I want to acknowledge Environment and Climate Change Canada as they have provided funding for all three of the projects that I mentioned here today. I'd also like to thank Scott Boswell, the program manager with OCCP. He is such a forward thinker and he's really taught me that there's no environmental challenge that can't be solved if you have the right people in the room. Planning staff at Regional District have been instrumental in making these projects happen. And I'd also like to acknowledge the elders and community members of the Okanagan Nation Alliance who are such a wealth of knowledge. Finally, need to acknowledge our data analysts and GIS analysts here at Ecoscape who have put in tremendous numbers of hours to update the ecosystem inventory. And thank you. I really appreciate you attending, and my contact information is here. If you have any questions about these projects in the future, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Greatly appreciated. And thanks to all of the panelists for the time that goes into preparing for these. As many of us have been presenters, it's not an insignificant amount of time and is often not appropriately recognized. So thanks to all. Marianne, I think you're still sharing screen there.
Oh, sorry.
And
thank you.
Questions specific to your presentation. Wondering if you did any work on the ratio of wildlife corridor that would have forest cover.
Any ratio of what? I think, sorry, am I still sharing here?
No,
okay.
it's good. Just wondering of the wildlife corridor itself, wondering if there's any work or research undertaken on the percentage of that wildlife corridor that was covered by, that had forest cover.
Yeah, no, not to my knowledge has that been done to date. The great thing about this collaborative process, though, is that we were able to engage a number of the different professors from locally here from UBC Okanagan and also Thompson Rivers, and in a number of different disciplines, actually. And so it's focused in agriculture, wildlife movement, but also forestry. So I wonder if that's something that could be explored in the future.
Thank you very much. There was no other specific questions for your presentation, but I think some of what you, kind of the last thoughts you left us with are a really good segue, and just appreciate all three of your perspectives. Nelson, kind of from that really high level governance lens and some of the challenges and opportunities there. Rod, bringing it back to the kind of local government lens and some of the specifics, and just getting into that you can't manage what you can't measure type approach, and the importance of, like one of your slides actually mentioned, managing risk, and then you got into some of the metrics and the data that are supporting those risk-informed decision-making processes. And Marianne, like beautiful collaboration examples and implementation, and the importance of working across professional groups and the foresters, the planners, the engineers, the biologists, and of course the agrologists. So really appreciate that kind of implementation perspective. Being cognizant of time here, we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to save 5 minutes at the end for each of the panelists to give kind of a 60 or 90 minute summary, but we've got 10 minutes here. One question that's kind of come up from a few different directions is the replicability and scalability of your approaches and how that can be utilized in other jurisdictions. Just my personal perspective, I've lived on Vancouver Island here for 10 years. Lots of talk about drought during my time in the Cowichan Valley, at the Comox Valley. I know Okanagan, of course, lots of talk about drought over the years, lots of collaboration between the two. Local governments across BC have similar challenges. And of course, the qualified professionals across the province being looked at to replicate their skill set and their expertise and apply that in different jurisdictions. And so I'd invite each of you to maybe share your thoughts on the replicability and scalability of what you've been working on, and maybe lessons learned for other practitioners in other areas of the province. And maybe just following the presentation order. Nelson, we'll go over to you first.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a question that we get often about the Okanagan Basin Water Board. The supplementary letters patent that created us in 1972 are a tool that's available for other local governments, albeit the act has changed somewhat. But the opportunity for an arm of local governments to play a larger role in watershed management definitely exists. I think that it's interesting in this new arena of governance, post 2016 with the New Water Sustainability Act from the province, some of the significant legislation around UNDRIP. My sense is that moving forward, watershed governance in the province of British Columbia is going to necessarily change. It's going to necessarily be more inclusive. And as all three of us, I think, mentioned, there is an increased need for us to be able to think hard about how we manage water as watersheds throughout the region and throughout the province are coping with, in some cases, multi-year droughts, in other cases, significant flooding. And so the need for us to be able to think long and hard about how we apply watershed management is something that is important. My feeling is that the evolution of watershed governance is going to be different from what the Okanagan Basin Water Board looks like today. And there's some amazing opportunities that we're already starting to see on Vancouver Island and also in northern BC, where new and innovative governance structures are being created. And as a result, there's a new sort of resurgence to be able to look at solutions to some of these emerging problems.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelson. Appreciate that. And Rod, over to you.
I think we're a pervade system. So water supply from upper watersheds is different from single water licenses or from places where they don't have shared water sources. But to replicate, there's lots of opportunity to understand the on-farm implications of what we're doing. I think water measurement on the farm is something that is talked about quite a bit, but isn't really used a lot across the province. And I would say anywhere across Canada. It's usually $1. It usually comes down to dollars. So by being part of the city and because measurement and responsibility is all part of that, they get water meters. And how that works into the future, I think we'll be able to certainly share a lot of that information.
Okay, thank you very much, Rod. And Marianne, over to you.
Yeah, I would say that all of the projects that I spoke about today are definitely scalable to other jurisdictions and recommended. So, I mean, with the ecosystem inventory, it had been over 20 years with the since that's been updated. And so we're talking about, wow, this really needs to be done more on a 5-year basis to make sure that we have an up-to-date understanding of what's happening. And so I think there's probably a lot of jurisdictions that are struggling kind of with those same issues, but having a good understanding of mapping and inventory in your jurisdiction, I think, is a really key starting point for making good policy decisions.
Thank you, Marianne. Data-informed decision-making. It's a great phrase. The next question we'd like to get into is, it's again come up a couple times, but environmental flow needs, and each of you referenced that kind of directly or indirectly, but wondering if you could speak a little bit to your experiences related to that, and that could relate to kind of political legislative implications, operational implications, like ongoing care and feeding implications. And again, we'll maybe go over to Nelson first.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And thanks for the question. So environmental flow needs in the Okanagan and environmental flows in general have become a significant priority both for us here at the Okanagan Basin Water Board, but also many of our partners. So I would look to the city of Kelowna, to the Okanagan Nation Alliance, to individual Indian bands, and the communities throughout the region. And in part, it's because we are seeing that as the winds are changing and as we anticipate governance and climate change and some of the other, an increased population, as Marianne mentioned, the potential conflict between the water that's in the stream for human uses and the water in the stream to be able to support and protect the fish and the fish populations that require it, we anticipate that that conflict is going to increase. So as a result of that realization, we've been considering and thinking and talking about critical flows and environmental flow needs for quite some time. We have a very sophisticated process that was developed that included 3 phases. If anybody is interested in reading more about it, they're all on our website, simply at obwb.ca/EFN. And they talk about the method that we applied to be able to calculate both a benchtop, but also an in situ method to be able to identify defensible and credible environmental flow need calculations. And I guess the final thing I would mention is that in addition to that, we've just recently created a tool to be able to support contextualizing real-time hydrometric data that we're getting from our stations, both the information that we collect in partnership with the Okanagan Nation Alliance, but also with Water Survey Canada. We take that information and then we contextualize it so that we understand where is our current water flows with respect to our environmental flow needs and our critical flow needs in the Okanagan. And that's turning into an enhanced communication tool for us to be able to better understand where our resources are needed, but also during times of low flow, where is it that there may need to be either Section 88s or 87s applied by the province to be able to ensure that water is flowing during the time that fish need it the most. And then I'll just finally note that in terms of budgets, we have a service specifically to be able to enhance and support hydrometrics in the Okanagan that is around $300,000 a year that is publicly funded through the local governments. And the overall project was funded by third party, mostly the federal government, Environment Canada, and it had a price tag of around $500,000 for that 7 to 8 years of activity.
Hey, thank you, Nelson. Sounds like you've got your hands full moving forward. Rod, over to you.
Yeah, EFNs, this is an interesting one because if we're just talking about our irrigation system, today we have a critical flow need or EFN requirement off of our water licenses to supply Mission Creek. There's no guarantee that that's going to remain that number. It might be a different number into the future. You just need to know that. You need to recognize you can live with it for today, but you may have to plan for something different tomorrow. So understanding that in our system, in particularly on the ag side, I won't talk about the city too, but on the ag side, this is all storage related. These are costs that have been paid for. These are costs that have been paid for by the ag community and for infrastructure. And in some cases there are, and certainly government funding. The system was built for something for a scope at the time that it was built. And we keep adjusting to this static infrastructure with new rules on EFNs. And it takes away from the actual purpose, the original purpose of the infrastructure. So I see EFNs being one of our biggest challenges in agriculture, especially as water licensing and all the other conservation factors come into play in the future. So we've got to pay attention to it.
Thank you very much, Rod. Appreciate that. And Marianne, comments on EFN?
Yeah, I would just quickly comment as a consulting biologist. We're already seeing issues here in the Okanagan with environmental flow needs. And so I just want to, really grateful that Nelson and Rod and others are working on these issues because I think, especially with climate change and things changing at such quick rates, it's going to continue and become so much more of a challenge as we move ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been a few other questions coming in. Just in the interest of time, we do want to respect the 1:30 wrap-up time here. So you've got all of our contact details. Please feel free to connect with any of us. Definitely appreciate that. I do want to give each of the panelists an opportunity to take a minute or two just for some kind of, probably a minute, for some closing comments. Also want to make sure Jane Kerner, the interim CEO of BCIA, has an opportunity to provide a comment. And just to put a plug in for the land summit coming up, for those of you who weren't able to join right at the start, this is a webinar supporting the 2024 Land Summit. I'm going to just drop in the chat once I get the right link, a link to the Land Summit, and encourage all of you to consider joining there. May 8th to 10th in Nanaimo. Early registration is open now. We're hoping for at least 700 delegates there, cross-section of quite a few different registrant bases. So definitely looking forward to seeing quite a few of you there. So maybe we'll go over and following the same order again. Nelson, in kind of a minute or less, if you have any wrap-up closing comments.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Ryan and Jane, for posting and facilitating this. I think I'll just take my few seconds here to really acknowledge the need that these complex issues that we're faced with at the watershed levels really does require a multi sort of expert group of individuals. And I think this panel is a great representation of that kind of expertise. And I think moving forward, it's that kind of thinking where we bring in ideas from multiple disciplines that ultimately allows us to be able to get to the next plane of good and better water management. So with that, I'd like to thank the BCIA and my fellow panelists. It's been a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Over to Rod.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to present. I've really enjoyed this, to be honest with you, and I've kind of prepared it to be very specific. That said, we've been working with the City of Kelowna on our water security or water responsibility planning processes, and we're looking at water, wastewaters, all of our water processes, natural assets, stormwater, EFNs. These are all part of water supply decisions and water decisions in the city, whether it's water supply, quality, or the entities and the environment that uses it. And the thing is, it's not one person like me who's making that decision or the public. There's a lot of decision makers in the process. And so it's educating, communicating, making sure you have good, sound information and data. So I'll close with that, and thank you very much again.
Thank you, Rod. And Marianne.
Thank you. I really just wanted to thank both Ryan and Jane for the opportunity to present and to share some of those collaborative projects. I guess the take home that I would say is just that there's, these same ideas with collaboration across disciplines, they can be applied to any project, right? And you can really run with them in all different areas. And I think the take home is really, if you do that, you're going to end up with a better product and a more implementable product. And yeah, so thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Marianne. And Jane, wondering if you'd like to share anything with the group.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you to Nelson and Rod and Marianne for your very interesting and educational participation and presentation today. It was great. Thank you so much. I think a lot of this comes down to what we as producers in various effects can do to just kind of see what we can do in the effects, increase attention to management techniques, becoming aware of opportunities to participate in community engagement, paying a lot more attention to what we're actually doing. It's not just so easy to go and turn on the irrigation. I mean, it is, but shouldn't we be monitoring perhaps? Are we doing it at the correct time? For ourselves as producers, and I'm one anyway, so as well as being an agrologist. So thank you so much for your presentation today. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jane. And for next steps, the recording of the webinar will be posted, and we'll be following up with those of you who were able to join here today with that link. Those of you who registered as a group will likely be following up with you as well to get a bit of a feel for how many people were in your group, just so we have an idea of kind of metrics for how many people were able to join here today. And really want to give a shout out to Nelson's team and the Okanagan Water Board for managing the technology today. It's always lots happening behind the scenes, and just appreciate their support of providing the technology and all the registration behind the scenes here. But with that, thanks to all of you for joining. And I'm gonna take a quote from one of Nelson's slides, where if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here today, is the opportunity for collaboration across all the different qualified professional groups. And yeah, with that, thank you for your time. If anybody happens to be in the Cowichan Valley, the Islands Ag Show is tomorrow and Saturday. I will be there, happy to connect in person. But otherwise, we hope to see you at the Land Summit, May 8th to 10th in Nanaimo. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.